Well, good evening, everyone. Here's the third live for talking about geopolitics. The first one was kind of just impromptu over the weekend because I was bored. Second one I did with my wife on her account, so those kind of take place. And we have a good time on that. It's not geopolitics related, but this definitely will be. So go ahead and ask your questions. My wife is moderating, but just be aware we are brand new to this, so if it gets out of control or whatever, she's doing her best, as well as I am. So we'll go ahead and get started. Please fire your questions off. I do keep an eye on them and watch them as they come through. I'm not going to do any debates or anything like that with the duetting and all that, but we'll go ahead and get started. My biggest focus today is going to be on, obviously, Ukraine is going to be, we'll talk a little bit about that, and Russia, but what happens after this? Like essentially what happens with great power politics and great power diplomacy and warfare once Ukraine is over with, because that doesn't go away. And starting with Ukraine, just kind of looking around today, Russia's making some advances, and it's kind of disappointing, not in the fact that Ukraine's disappointing. It's just we've been blessed and we've been somewhat spoiled by Ukraine punching well above its weight. And Russia is now concentrating very heavily in the east, and they're making very slow gains, but they are making gains. And because of that, we're going to see probably some disappointing news over the next few weeks before American equipment and Western equipment and all of that gets online and comes in, and the 700 or so thousand people that they're conscripting get somewhat trained up. Eventually the tables will turn, but just be aware we're going into somewhat of a darker period for this conflict, unfortunately, and it's going to turn towards the Russians probably over the next few weeks. Hearing back and forth that highway that runs up to Severodonetsk has been captured by the Russians, but then I've heard that the Ukrainians have held it. Not entirely sure. Just know that's a major supply line. But right now it's too convoluted. There's a lot of fighting going on. President Zelensky said that there's about 100 people dying per day on the Ukrainian side. And from the United Kingdom intelligence, it looks like roughly 200 to 250 Russians are dying. So the Ukrainians are keeping the advantage in attrition, but the Russians are more than willing to let that many people die, unfortunately. So I don't think there's a scenario where there's going to be nuclear weapons. I don't think this is the start of a World War III situation. We've moved closer to the potential for that to happen because of mistakes. Mistakes can be made, but I don't think that's where we're going so far. I think that eventually this will be sorted out within the Russian-Ukrainian sphere of influence, whether Ukraine ejects them out or whether Russia takes what they want and gets what they want, and we move on. So what does that look like afterwards? So as I said in kind of my lead up to the my little sneak peek I did, there are three core tenets that define global superpowers. And these are all things that at one time the global superpowers had, whether it was Rome, whether it was the Mongols, whether it was Great Britain, the United States, China, and Russia. And those are geography is the first one. And that includes geography where your proximity to friendly neighbors. There's also the resources they have in that geography and the ability to move those resources. And the ability to move is not man-made. It's how you can get them around, say on like rivers. The U.S. has one of the best river systems in the world. The Mississippi River moves so much of our stuff to the oceans for trade. It's incredible. But where does that leave the U.S. and Russia after this? So starting with Russia, you look at Russia's like there are three areas where you have to look: the geography, the political institutions, and the demography. Russia has a problem with their geography. It's a large, flat country that's very cold. So that cold works to their advantage when it's cold. When things thaw out and it comes to the summer, they're basically a wide open plot of ground going from the Carpathian Mountains eastward. And that goes all the way basically to the Pacific Ocean. And they know that. And that's why they're doing this. That's why Russia is trying to take places such as Ukraine. They're trying to take Moldova. Eventually, I think they will try to, if they win. Now, this is all contingent on them winning in Ukraine, which I personally don't think is going to happen. But they will try to take Ukraine, Moldova, and then I fully believe if they are that successful and they have that much success, they will test the waters against NATO because they need to have enough standoff distance from Moscow to the Western powers. And they don't consider Poland a Western power. They don't consider the Baltics a Western power. They consider like Germany and France and the United Kingdom and obviously the US. So that's what they want standoff distance from. So that's why they want Eastern Europe all the way to the Carpathian Mountains so that they could funnel those troops through there. So geography is not on the side of Russia. Political institutions, that's pretty simple. They have a pretty terrible leadership system there. It doesn't lend itself to innovation. It doesn't lend itself to free markets. And that's why they struggle to get past basically a baseline economy of using natural resources. Most advanced economies move past just natural resources. They have a subset of that, a base of that. Like in the US, we have mining and oil production and things like that, and refining. Same with Canada, same with other countries. But we also do other things. We build cars, we build tanks, we build airplanes, etc. Russia doesn't really do that. So their political institutions hinder them heavily. And then I've talked about this before. Russia's demographics are horrible, but not as horrible as who I'm going to talk about next. They have a problem where not only are they have a demographic inversion, and this is something that Peter Zion talks about, and I'm a big subscriber to his theories, but their demographics are so bad that they need more people. And this is why they're part of the reason why they're kidnapping people, but they're losing people to the brain drain at a larger rate. So Russia is going to struggle. And that's why you see them struggling in Ukraine, because they just didn't have the resources and the necessary things to do what they wanted to do. It's why you see them trying to blockade the Black Sea. They've blockaded about 1/3 of the Black Sea with their ships, the top third. So they're effectively blockading Ukrainian grain and holding back their own grain, which is going to cause huge problems in global hunger. And I'm going to use that to plug our charity, Action Against Hunger. All of your donations, all of the cool little roses and all the neat little things that you guys send me for this, all of that money, with the exception of about 10% of it goes to just promotion. Of that $54, I spent about $10 to promote this live. So everything else will go to Action Against Hunger, and I will donate everything tomorrow. I'll try to do it on about a weekly basis. So, and then I'll show you guys exactly what was donated. So all the cool things where you do make me look silly on camera, keep it coming, because it does help for sure with the rising global hunger problem. And I guess that's a good segue right now, where the food crisis coming was already on its way. And I talked about this in a video a while back, a couple days ago, where Northern Africa, Southeast Asia, and the smaller parts of South America are going to run into a problem where they're going to run out of food. And experts at the World Food Organization, at the UNHCR, are saying that we could lose between 500 million and 1 billion people. This was already starting to happen because of countries internalizing. And Russia just got it started early. And because of that, we are going to see a problem where people are going to die from not having food, unfortunately. And that's why I'm using that as the charity. They're very good and whatnot. And this food crisis is going to affect everyone. Prices in the United States are going to go up. Prices in non-food producing countries that are Western nations, such as the United Kingdom, Portugal, Spain, those types of countries are going to see large price increases, and it's going to cause lots of problems for food. So help out where you can. And I keep seeing things fly across the screen, so I really appreciate it. So I'm kind of keeping an eye on questions, trying to answer them as I go through, but people blow through these pretty quickly. So yeah, better get a deep freezer and start growing your own food. I do have a freezer, but I would suggest it if you have the room. Anyways, continuing on with my thought process on who is going to define global power in the future. When it comes to Russia, their demographics are inverted, meaning they just don't have the population going forward. They're not going to be able to support the aging population, and now they're killing their young people. Some as much as 20,000 soldiers have died. Those are people that actually had held jobs at one point for the Russian economy. The other 500,000, between 500,000 and 2 million people, young people, have fled Russia because of its policies. And this is a humongous problem that Vladimir Putin is going to have to deal with likely in the next decade, if he's still alive. So the biggest issue that countries like Russia faces is demographics. And that is why they've done this now. They're running out of time. Interestingly, China's in the same boat, except they're worse. China probably has the worst demographic situation ever in the history of the world. Currently, I believe China is the second most powerful country in the world, but that's on paper. And I'll talk about militarily because I see a question, how does China do versus the US and Taiwan? I'll talk about that in this. I have a portion of this is military, but because of that, the demographic problem China's facing, they're going to decline heavily over the next 30 years. It's going to be really bad for them because of Mao's baby boom. So back 50 years ago, Mao pushed a baby boom, maybe a little longer than that. And that's where we see over the last 30 years this boom in economic power from China. And because of that, they saw massive amounts of famine as well because they didn't plan. That's where the Great Famine, and it was a part of the century of humiliation that China went through. And part of that is it led to the one-child policy. And the fact of the matter is it completely flipped their demographics on their head. So now they have this aging baby boom population because of Mao. And then now they have a very small support system underneath them. Couple that with the fact that they have no immigration, because immigration to China is really disgusting to them. They don't actually like other cultures. Just ask any African American who's gone there. I have a very good black friend that went to China, and she is treated horribly there. And then also just see the Uyghurs. They're basically committing genocide about that. So China's aging population means 300 million of their workers will become senior citizens in the next 30 years. After that, their population inversion is so bad that we likely will see their population drop to around 800 million people. That's incredible, considering they have well over 1 billion right now. So what is the advantage of China being debt-free? They're not debt-free. They actually are one of the most debt-laden countries in the world. And I'll talk about that too. So coupling that with, we'll go into the economics of things because that's part of the political institutions. China has a big GDP on paper, but what is often neglected when you look at something like a big GDP is it leads the world in actual debt. It really does. It holds a lot of US debt, but on its own, it has a lot of global debt, and it's used that debt to finance its massive infrastructure projects. And these massive infrastructure projects are what has propped that economy up. And a lot of people neglect that those types of projects require money to maintain, require money to build. And a lot of the problems with China recently is they're seeing a lot of capital flight. A lot of companies are leaving China, and it's part of that decoupling the US and West is partly because the Chinese monetary policy, partly because a lot of people have angst, rightfully so, about the problems China has with its human rights. So much of the companies that China is propping up would be loss-making companies if it wasn't for taxpayer funding. They have built things like useless infrastructure. If you ever Google something kind of interesting, look up Chinese ghost cities. They have like 50 cities they built with infrastructure money just to provide jobs that there's no one there. They're not working. No one's filling these cities. It's crazy. So when it comes to comparison to the US and China, Chinese businesses use twice the capital, meaning it costs twice as much for a Chinese company to produce something that the United States could produce similarly. It requires 5 times the amount of labor hours to produce the same output as an American firm. And this is all stuff that the Chinese economists are putting out. So because of that, China has to spend hundreds of billions of dollars more than the United States every year to feed its people, police its people, provide social services. And that's all because it has this massive population. So did Russia forget to threaten us with nukes today? I don't know. It's like every 20 minutes. So it's slowed down a bit. But anyways, going back, I was reading Michael Buckley, who talks about U.S. primacy going forward. And he says, when you look at the net economic power, not gross. So a lot of people like to look at gross domestic product, the gross number of ships they have, the gross number of trade they do. But you got to look at the net. That's because we don't do that with businesses. We don't look at a business and go, oh yeah, you made $8 billion and then ignore all of their expenses. We have to do that too in economies. And because of that, the U.S. is actually roughly 3 to 4 times more economically powerful than China. And it's because of the way our system's set up versus theirs. And this country, and the two countries are splitting, and the U.S. is actually leaving China behind in this regard by billions of dollars now every year. And we are now seeing that happen in real numbers because China's GDP, which I know I told you not to look at gross, but this was a metric that just came out, is only supposed to grow by 2%. The U.S. is supposed to grow by 3.1%. This will be the first time since 1976 China has lagged behind the U.S., and this trend is going to continue. So does India show any opportunity to fill the power vacuum in Asia? Absolutely. Where China is failing. Now here, I'll caveat this. India is on a path to become very strong. Very strong. I don't think in my lifetime I'll see them pass the U.S. Because the U.S. has a lot of things going for it, and I can talk about that. But or the EU, frankly, because the EU has a lot of things going for it as well. It's a little less stable than America. But anyways, India has the population, and they don't have the demographic inversion. They have healthy demographics. They're a democracy, so their political institutions for now lend itself to be more adaptable, more innovative than China can be. So by the end of this decade, by 2030, which the vast majority of us are alive, India's population will be bigger than China's. India will pass China, and all of the things that China screwed up, India learned from, and they will be very powerful. So go Chiefs. This is the Boise State Broncos, not the Denver Broncos. I like the Cowboys, but I also like the Chiefs. They're like my second favorite team. Anyway, so a lot of people like to tout the Chinese currency and now the ruble as currencies that are pushing strongly to potentially take over the dollar. Ruble's kind of gone out the door recently, but everyone talks about the yuan when it comes to the Chinese primacy or the overtake of U.S. supremacy globally. Well, you have to kind of look at that in real numbers. 59% of the global reserve currencies are held in U.S. dollars. That's huge. 21% is held in euro. 5% is held in pound sterling. Another 5% is held in Japanese yen. And then finally, we get to the Chinese yuan at number 6 with only 3%. Only 3% of the global currency reserves are Chinese right now. And that's just ahead of Canada's dollar. Canada has 2% of the global reserve currency. So I don't foresee China taking over anything in currency. And a lot of it doesn't have to do with the raw numbers now, but it comes down to the US continues to grow its reserve currency globally because it's seen as stable. So what's going on right now and what's going on in the last 2 years? A lot of instability, a lot of volatility. And because of that, people run to what is stable. Chinese yuan doesn't seem stable right now because look at the lockdowns, COVID. They've hitched their wagon to what is essentially a declining power in Russia, and people are concerned about that. So who is the most stable currency in the global world? Either the dollar or the euro. And right now, the euro is backed by a group of nations that are facing down a potential foe on their front porch. The U.S. isn't. So that's why people are moving to it. So on a side note, a lot of people like to say, well, the US is printing money at a ridiculous rate. Well, actually, do you know what currency has the most in recirculation? It's the Chinese yuan. They have an equivalent of 25 trillion US dollars in circulation. The US has only 14 trillion. Chinese yuan has 25 trillion in circulation, and they make up 3% of the global reserves. That's nuts. And that's why the US is the global standard for currency. So why do they have so much out there? Well, in order to pay for all the initiatives and the frivolous infrastructure that they've used to prop their economy up, they needed money to do so, so they printed it. They did that for the Belt and Road Initiative. And then to avoid the inflation that inevitably comes from that, it's currency manipulation. And that's what a lot of the Obama, Trump, and now Biden administration go after when it comes to China, is their currency manipulation. And because of the capital controls that are necessary to maintain its currency at the levels, it will never overtake the dollar, period. So keeping up on the seas, is Russia teaming up with China? Yeah, so Russia is trying to. China's not having it. And the reality for China and Russia is China does, like, when it comes to the West, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's something like $1.4 trillion in trade with the US and the European Union combined, which what you would argue is the Western power nations. They do something like 130 billion in trade with Russia. So China knows who feeds them. China knows who pays their bills. And so because of that, they may out in the media say, yay, Putin, yay, Russia, boo the West. But the reality is they aren't doing a damn thing right now for Russia, because Russia is not getting any support from China. They're not getting computer chips. They're not getting any money. They're not getting any aid. In fact, China's giving more stuff to Ukraine than they're giving to Russia. And that's because they're afraid of economy crushing sanctions from the West. So it's pretty significant. And I think Russia is caught off guard there. I think Russia really thought they had an ally that would be willing to take the pain like the Russians do. And the Chinese are like, nope. We need to make sure we're taken care of. And America and the Brits and the Europeans, they're the ones that buy our bread for us. So, yeah. Would the Chinese people turn on their government? No. And I don't think the Russian people will either anytime soon. The propaganda machines are different today than they used to be. It's very easy for them to control the populations now with social media and to discredit anything. So I don't see them like overthrowing them and whatnot. So let's see here. All right. So talking about this Belt and Road Initiative, which is what a lot of people bring up when it comes to China. And it does affect Russia too. Russia is kind of involved in it because they would benefit from such a thing. And the problem is China has exposed itself and given loans to countries that are not good creditworthy countries. They're rated poor countries for a reason. They don't pay their loans back. And now Russia's hoping that they can use their influence, whether it's military or economic influence, to ensure that they get paid back. But a lot of these countries can't afford it. And it's looking like with the global downturns that are taking place, they really won't be able to afford it. So these Belt and Road initiatives are going to cause China to have to write off billions of dollars in debts or of loans to these countries. Or they're just going to have to start taking over the assets, which is what they did in Sri Lanka. And that's why Sri Lanka is having a lot of problems. So China looks great because it's handing out lots of money to everybody and everybody loves it. But in the long term, the lack of economic viability and a lot of the projects that just won't go anywhere are going to put China in both a tough diplomatic and economic situation. And that's why I don't think financially they're just going to be better in a better place than the United States. So asteroids, yeah, I mean, fuck asteroids. If we get hit by an asteroid, I have a saying. It's from the movie A Million Ways to Die in the West, and I just say people die at the fair. So yeah, if an asteroid hits us, people die at the fair. So kind of looking at, and I'll jump over to the one thing that China does well And the one thing that I'm very concerned about, well, two things really. The first is their advances in AI, in artificial intelligence. Now, they are not necessarily beating the US, but they are matching the US. And AI doesn't operate in a bubble, so their discoveries may be different than our discoveries and vice versa. And it's one of those things that once we discover it, it's a game changer for either country. So that's a concern I have for China. And if they can actually do that and build the automation necessary, they can probably subvert their problems with demography and maintain on a trajectory. The problem with AI is it's incredibly resource intensive, and a lot of their best AI scientists have said we don't like China and are moved to the US, quite frankly. So AI is a giant threat, sort of. I'm on the fence. I'm not so much in Elon Musk's camp where I'm like, it's going to kill us all Terminator style, but I'm also not like, it's going to be the end all and we can all be like Wall-E sitting in fat chairs as AI takes care of us. I think it's going to enhance us, but it's also going to enhance our ability to kill each other. So, it's interesting. Am I going to do the wallpaper from that one restaurant? That's my wife. I mean, if she really wants it, she gets whatever she wants generally. So, so could China withstand a blockade and sanctions? Sanctions, it could sort of, because we couldn't sanction China as much as we sanction Russia, because they make a lot of end products. Now, they don't make a lot of components, and that's why their economy is a little bit volatile, is all of the stuff, let's say take a computer, all of the really cool components that go in a computer, the motherboards, the RAM, which RAM is made like by Micron, or chipsets are made, Micron's a company in Boise if you didn't know, but it's a huge company actually, or they make them in Taiwan. China gets all of that hard to make stuff from other countries, and then they put it together and say, here world, it's for you. That's where China's manufacturing is. That's not hard to do. That's why the U.S. is pivoting to South America, because they can train South American countries to do that just fine. So, the end product stuff, but because of that, because there is enough in end products that the world wants from them, and it would take a long time to retool, we couldn't immediately just crush them with sanctions like we do with Russia, and they're more integrated into the global economy. Now, over time, the sanctions would hurt China way more than Russia, because yes, we wouldn't need the end products as much, and we'd find ways to retool, whereas Russia's economy is strictly energy-based. I mean, over 50% of their economy comes from energy, and as we've seen in Europe, unfortunately, people need it, and they're willing to make deals for it. So it's very much a concern when it comes to things like AI, because AI isn't necessarily hardware. China's become very good at software because it doesn't take as much raw materials. But speaking of raw materials, that's the number two thing I think I'm concerned about with what China has. China has a monopoly on rare earth metals. And it's funny that they're called rare earth metals because they're not that rare. You can find them a lot of places, but the mining infrastructure as well as the use infrastructure is all in China right now for the most part. And they have huge reserves of rare earth metals. And those are the types of things that they sell to other countries to build the cool gadgets and such. So it's what they sell to Japan to make high-end screens and things like that. So yeah, it's those are the two biggest things. As far as Russia is concerned, there's not a lot I'm concerned with when it comes to Russia. They're saber rattling when it comes to nuclear weapons. I like that China's a little more reserved, like the U.S., and it's because we're more pragmatic about it. Both China and the U.S. We're like, look, that's bad for business, but the reality for Russia is no one wants to do business with them really anymore, and it seems like China's even backing away, at least until this war is over, and then they're basically going to be Russia's big brother and telling them what to do. So I think the biggest issue is that sort of relationship. So let's see, a lot of questions about the grain blockade and breaking it up. So how does it get broken up? That's a good question. It's a very tough question. So currently, the United Kingdom and a core group of people in the UN have put forth some ideas. I don't know how viable they are. Oh, what's up, babe? What are you doing?
They asked for this.
Oh, okay.
Remind you, it's backwards, guys, because the screen is backwards. So
is it backwards? I don't know.
Yeah.
I figured out a way to not have it be backwards going in my regular videos. Anyway, so when it comes to actually Arizona has a lot of rare earth metals too. So yeah, sorry, got off track there. Anyways, the blockade, I know at an emotional level we want to break it because we're going to sit and watch a lot of people starve to death, and it's sad. And Russia is very evil for weaponizing that as a means of trying to end sanctions and create influence. But the reality is like anything else, the only militaries capable of doing anything, even regionally, are navies such as Turkey's. Well, Turkey belongs to NATO. And even if Turkey comes in there under the UN flag, Russia's going to be like, yeah, no, you're still NATO. You're still NATO influencing NATO operations. The closest navy that could potentially assist that's not in that realm would be potentially Egypt. But again, they would likely have to be supported somewhat by NATO. And it's a very sticky situation because the minute you engage the Russian military and tell them to move so we can get food out to the rest of the world, you're basically giving them a wartime demand. And if Russia decides to fire, that country has a duty. I don't know if they can see that.
I'll put it in the comment section as well.
I don't know what it says. What does it say?
It's our Cash App and Venmo.
Oh, Cash App and Venmo?
For donations that people want to donate directly.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah,
read it backwards. I'll post it in the comments.
It's going, like I said, it's going to charity. It doesn't go to us.
It does not.
It's going to charity. It's going to Action Against Hunger. But
food insecurity is a big problem. It's near and dear to my heart and yours as well.
Yeah. So.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye. Anyway, so. Yeah, that's a good idea. Add it to my profile. I need to do that. I'm new to this TikTok stuff still. As you can tell, I'm an old military dude, so all this tech is new to me. But when it coming back to breaking this up, if we can get non-NATO countries to form a coalition of the willing, so to speak, they could fly under the UN flag and potentially have the ability to break the blockade up. The problem with that is Russia sees that as a strategic advantage right now, so they're just not going to let it go willingly. The Black Sea is currently shut down by Turkey to all military traffic that isn't based in the Black Sea. That's why you see the Russian Black Sea fleet being able to operate there. That's where they're based. But other military warships aren't allowed into the Black Sea by Turkey's order. And Turkey controls the entrance and exit of the Black Sea through the Bosphorus Straits and the Turkish Straits. So because of that, that would undermine Turkey's own rules, which would then open up Russia to go, hey, Turkey, you're letting warships through. We're coming too. And then you see the North Sea or the Pacific Russian fleet setting sail for the Black Sea to support its Black Sea fleet operations. And that becomes very messy. And when it's messy like that, that's when accidents happen where Russia fires on a NATO country. And God forbid they fire on a NATO country that's extraordinarily powerfully navally. Because navally? I don't think that's a word. I think that's in like your belly button. But it has an extraordinarily powerful navy. And because of that, let's say the U.S. sails a carrier battle group into the Black Sea. Russia fires on it. That carrier battle group would wipe the Black Sea fleet off the face of the earth. That would start World War III. So that's why it's unfortunate. I just don't think that Western nations are going to be prepared to engage Russia in that way just to feed the world. And I know a lot of people are going to die, but if it comes down to nuclear war, a lot more people would die, to include potentially killing the earth entirely. So that's why I think the Black Sea won't be opened up, and it has to be a diplomatic situation. That's where potentially you could see sanctions coming off the table. And it's kind of easy to take certain sanctions off the table for Russia right now when the European Union is undermining those sanctions anyway. And that's like in arenas like energy, and they're finding ways to go around the sanctions so they can continue to get energy. Well, if you're going to go around the sanctions, why even sanctions? So maybe that's a scenario where we can have a dialogue to allow food to get out, but Russia's sanctions are dropping. Now, the other option, and I've seen this, is can we just sink the Black Sea fleet by providing Ukraine with like naval strike missiles, which is the brand new shiny missile the Navy has that goes like 500 kilometers, or giving them Harpoon missiles, which are about as capable as the Neptune missile. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if we want to give naval strike missiles to Ukraine, which I believe we're going to, and they want to start sinking ships out in the ocean to free up grain, by all means. We're already giving them everything else except for actual platforms. Might as well give them the missiles, and if they use them how they see fit, then so be it. And it'd be a global win, and Ukraine would be seen as the righteous fighter in this situation. So, yeah, I'm not sure if there's a way outside of breaking that blockade up to match the amount of grain that needs to get out. Someone asked, can they go by train? They are. Actually, the rail lines moving out of Ukraine are moving through Germany, and they're going up to Bremerhaven, I think is the port, and they're leaving out of there, but that's not even remotely enough compared to what you could just do by dumping it into a ship and sailing it out. The amount of time and effort to try and get train loads, it'll help. I mean, it'll save lives, but it's not going to save a lot of lives. So not as much as just getting them all the food. So, yeah. Will Russia go through Turkey's blockade? No, because Turkey's NATO, and Turkey has made it very clear no one is coming in. And Turkey has actually quite a strong navy in the Black Sea. And the reality is the U.S. Navy is sitting right outside of the Black Sea too. So if anyone wants to try to run Turkey's stated blockade, not blockade, but stated closure of the strait and engages Turkey, the U.S. military would be involved immediately. So I don't think Russia's going to try to run it at all. That would be very stupid of them. That's a quick way to break up the blockade, because they'd lose their entire Black Sea fleet by their own idiocy. But they're not that stupid. So I don't think that's going to be a situation we see. So might this encourage other countries that haven't yet to try and sanction Russia? Yeah, absolutely. I think India might come online with this. Maybe if India starts seeing a lot of food insecurity in its region. Now, India itself is largely food secure, but it has trade with a lot of countries that will be insecure, and I think that's going to help. I think Russia, unfortunately, by the time a lot of people have died, Russia eventually will have to change its mind, but we're going to see a lot of people die in that situation unless this war's over in the next couple months, because if this grain doesn't get out in the next 3 months, it's not going to make it in time to feed a lot of people. So, let's see, do we have a law or something that allows us to run Mexico or Canada if we start getting attacked? No. And we wouldn't want to. They would, I believe that especially Canada would come to our aid. Canada is a great ally. It's as much as there's a reason we don't have a lot of military bases to the north. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have Canada and they're very capable. And the Canadians are basically our, I would say, right-hand man in here. And a lot of people give me a lot of crap about the fact that I say that Canada leans towards America more than it leans towards Europe, despite its ties to Europe. It's greater ties to Europe than the U.S. But if this hemisphere, if the North American continent came under attack, you better believe Canada would be right there next to the U.S., just smoking fools out there with their snipers and stuff. So yeah, we would never have to overtake Canada to force them to do anything. Frankly, we wouldn't need Canada if someone tried to attack the U.S., but having them is not a problem. Same with Mexico. Mexico, there's a vested interest there. There's business interests. The trade between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico is enormous, and there's a lot of sharing of not only trade but families. I mean, I joke about the sealing of the deal between the Blake Lively Ryan Reynolds marriage. We're basically cousins now, and none of us want to disappoint Ryan Reynolds, so we get along. And we might have some political differences and systemic differences, but Canada and the U.S. are tight. We'll be all right. And as much as we kind of gripe about Mexico, the U.S. needs Mexico and Mexico needs the U.S. And a lot of it has to do with immigration and that demographics I was talking about previously, because immigration actually helps prop up U.S. demographics, whereas China absolutely denies anyone access to China immigration-wise. The U.S. is relatively open, and that helps us maintain a strong demographic within the U.S. So immigration is a good thing. I'm not entirely saying that run immigration trains across the border, but we need to do better in that regard. And then, I mean, speaking of like the alliances that the U.S. has, if you go back to kind of China, that's another problem China has. A lot of countries start to fail when you see little countries rise up and come together and want to beat up the big country. You saw that in Europe. Germany started outpacing the rest of the European world pretty significantly in the World War II era, and the rest of Europe rose up against them because Europe obviously got belligerent with that. But before that, the discussion was being had. Hey, are you seeing how big Germany's getting? Hey, France, we're in the UK. Take a look at Germany. So it was already starting to happen. And a lot of people say that in history, that's what happens to great powers. A lot of little powers come together and stand up against the great power. Saw that in Rome. You see that in a lot of places. The British Empire was another one that had that happen. The opposite has happened to the U.S., frankly. The U.S. currently operates 70 separate alliances with countries. So they have 70 countries with different alliances with some sort of military alliance or agreement. That's more than anyone in the history of the world. So that alone, what's up?
Take a break. Take a drink.
I have a drink right here.
We'll drink it.
I'm like a toddler.
You keep trying to clear your throat without clearing your throat.
Oh, do I?
Yeah.
I'm new to this. Anyways.
Stop for a drink every once in a
Well,
while.
I didn't even think of it. I get excited about
Love your
geopolitics. Love you. Anyways, so, yeah. Kirkland, water, doing some advertising. Go to Costco and get adequate water. Anyways, so 70 there's 70 countries that are allied in some form with the US. 10 of those countries surround China. The US has no adversarial nation near it. They have no belligerent nation. We don't even have nations that are remotely disagreeable with us. Because of that, we are able to project our military power outwards, whereas China has 50% of their military relies on border defenses. And usually I drink whiskey, and I don't know why I didn't do that. I'm sitting out there, but oh well. By now I'd probably be like shit-faced. But anyway, so what was I talking about? Alliances. So because of that, they have to focus on their border defenses more than the U.S. does by a long shot. I mean, they have, even though they talk about being friends, they have Russia that they have to worry about with their adventurism. So it's because of that. Well, and Cuba's actually kind of a friend of ours too. Honestly, I see Cuban policy going by the wayside as that whole system kind of dies out. And you've already seen it. We've kind of opened up more with Biden. So, but I wouldn't, if there was a disagreeable nation, yeah, Cuba, I guess. But I mean, let's be honest. But because of that, the U.S. doesn't have to worry about not only its alliances, it doesn't have to worry about even defending itself in its own region. China does. So does Russia. Russia's got actually literally belligerent nations on its border. And by its own doing, by the way, it's not like the NATO didn't expand. Countries ran to ask for NATO coverage the minute they could leave Russia because Russia was so terrible that they left. They wanted to get better with Western equipment stuff. So anyway, so because of that, you see a lot of these little nations that normally would rise up against and form alliances to rise up against the great power actually using the U.S. The U.S. is a good insurance policy for a lot of these countries. And statistically, if you look, every country that had some form of military alliance since World War II with the U.S. has not been attacked. None of the Western nations in NATO have ever been attacked. Now I'm talking serious military alliances. Israel doesn't have actually military alliances with us. We have like assurances, but yeah. So because of that, a lot of countries see the U.S. as a big insurance policy. That's not what happened in like Rome or Great Britain. That's why the U.S. is going to maintain a lot of its force projection capability, but also a lot of these alliances because it's we are, like I said, insurance for a lot of them. So yeah, if you guys are lagging, I'm not sure what is causing it. I have like 600 meg internet, so it's not me. I have a lot of fast. So speaking on their defenses, China has like 35% of China's military budget goes to that coastal defense and border defense, which is why they've developed islands in the Spratly Islands for military use. That was their way of combating U.S. carrier power, and that and missiles. So I talked about this briefly. I think it was in my last live, but it's not hard for the U.S. to defeat the missile systems in China because they can create enough standoff distance. The U.S. Navy can create enough standoff distance to get away from their very dangerous short and medium range missiles. And that forces China to use ballistic missiles, which, because navies move on the ocean, would require real-time updates by satellite. The U.S. would just destroy those satellites, and they wouldn't be able to use that. And then blockade of Shanghai, blockade of a lot of the areas, along with our allies, because I'm sure if China started getting shitty, Japan would like to jump in on that. And also Australia, the UK might come in because of AUKUS, which I think is a great alliance, mainly because of by default of what Australia is, it wants to become a good naval power, and it should be. The US is the best naval power in the world, and the UK is also an outstanding naval power, both in history and in just punching well above its weight currently. So joining forces with them is really a big thing for Australia, and that would counter a lot of what China would have to offer in the South China Sea, not to mention Japan's a solid navy as well. So China could shoot our satellites as well, but the U.S. operates a little differently on how it works when it comes to missile systems. Our guided missiles are internally tracking systems. So once it's fired, and it's kind of a fascinating system. I'm trying to remember, it's a lot of like air-to-air missiles that we use where it's fire and forget, but it doesn't require, it just fire in a general area on a large arc, and it'll scan for targets and find them. China, not yet anyways, doesn't have missiles like that. Their long-range missiles require guidance by satellite. U.S. has what are like smart missiles, and it's part of the same thing, the Excalibur round I talked about in artillery, where the artillery round flips out fins and then glides to a target. That artillery round actually is taught to recognize the target and hit it. Similar thing. So, yeah. But let's see here. What about natural disasters that's happening in Ukraine with gas in the water? I haven't heard about that. Gas in the water, that'd be really bad. But I mean, most even commercial filtration systems could deal with that. So let's see. Your cat's obsessed with me. Well, that's all that matters. I'm done for the night then. If I got a cat that likes me, I'm good to go. So really, China just can't project any power anywhere outside of the South or East China Sea. I mean, the U.S. has absolute dominance of the high seas. 85% of China's sea and air platforms are short range, but that puts Taiwan obviously within their targets. So, what about Marcos from the Philippines wanting to have closer relations with China? That's surprising because the previous president wanted closer ties with China and then realized that was a horrible idea, and he was staunchly anti-American, and like 80% of Filipinos want closer ties to the United States. That was just a recent poll, and I just read that today. So I don't foresee that being an official policy. It's kind of like pandering to China and then kind of under the table, all right, U.S., we know what's really going on. So I think that's kind of what is really happening with countries, to include the Solomon Islands, because I saw that Solomon Islands signed a deal with China. But again, that's a place where everyone knows who pays their bills, and that's Australia. So I think it's just kind of hedging bets and things like that. So yeah. Let's see. No, I don't. To be fair, I do not think China I'm just being clear. China and the U.S. are not on a path to war. I just think both countries are pragmatic and realizing that each other are the potential most dangerous adversary they face. So you always prepare for your most dangerous adversary. The U.S. and the United States have good trade relations. I do not think we will see a war between them anytime soon. I don't think China has the capability to take Taiwan, and we would see that coming by a mile if that was happening. A lot of people keep saying China is ramping up to attack Taiwan. Nothing indicates that at all. It would take 60 days of movements within China that we would watch happening in real time on satellites for them to build the combat power necessary to move across the Taiwan Strait. So I don't see any war happening. And then China is already facing economic problems and they're facing demographic problems. And if you want to see a country that will lose a lot of its young people to war, watch China go to war with Taiwan. And the reason is Ukraine has been having to deal with the potential for Russian war for like 8 years. Taiwan has been dealing with the specter of a Chinese war for 80 years. They have been preparing for a war like that for 8 decades. And because of that, they have developed systems within their country that will allow them to not only survive various strikes from China, but also can survive a long pronounced war with China with the assistance of its security alliances, such as the assurances things like the U.S., Japan, etc. provide for that, because Japan and Taiwan just recently signed a deal together. So if that's the case, a lot of Chinese would die. Their economy would be a problem, and they would make their demographics worse. So if I could pick one permanent ally in the Middle East, who would it be? Man, that's so hard. I am not a fan of Saudi Arabia, to be clear. I think Saudi Arabia is a terrible kingdom, and I'm very glad that the U.S. doesn't have to rely on Saudi oil anymore. We were originally drawing down ties with Saudi Arabia. Weirdly, Trump pulled troops out and then brought troops back. And the reason that Saudi is an ally is because it's an enemy of my enemy is my friend situation. Not that Saudi is an enemy per se. It's just that Saudi is counter to Iran. And if Iran wasn't so belligerent and fundamentalist in the opposite direction of Saudi, they would probably be a choice I would take. But again, it's like, which is the lesser of the two evils? And unfortunately, it's Saudi Arabia right now for U.S. I guess if I really had to choose, I'd pick Israel because they're just a natural ally. But I'm not a super fan of some of the things they do too. But that's just really, there's not a lot of, the Middle East is so messy. And in general, the U.S. is leaving the Middle East completely. And it's concerning countries like France, who now has to fill the void of securing the trade lines throughout that area because they rely on Middle Eastern energy. So, yeah. How is Russia dangerous? I'm just anti-war unless they attacked us at home. Russia's dangerous to people we care about. I mean, and we care about our European brothers and sisters across the pond. We have alliances, and we have an obligation to fulfill those alliances. So if Russia were to continue on this path, say to Moldova and then eventually into Poland, we have an obligation to fulfill that. And Russia is dangerous because they have aspirations of reinstating the Soviet imperialist era, or even going back to Peter the Great and his ambitions to push all the way to Paris. Putin sees himself as a pseudo Peter the Great Stalin mix, and because of that, he's very dangerous for Europe. And it's a similar situation as Nazi Germany. And I know this is kind of callous, but we have a lot of trade with Europe, and it would cost us a lot of money to not push back on Russia, a lot more money than we're spending now. A war pushing into Poland and potentially even Germany from Russia would cost the U.S. trillions of dollars rather than the 40 billion we just dumped into Ukraine to try to counter them. So because of that, we have a natural want to help them. And it's a core American value too, let's be honest. When we stand up against evil, we have a moral strength within us to stand up against evil and then help people when they're in need. And we do that with our hospital ships when we send it to Japan, or we sent it to, I think it was Singapore after the earthquake, or New Zealand after the earthquake as well. We sent our hospital ships there. A big story I like to tell about how the U.S. is very helpful, but we also do it because we want to buy the goodwill of people, and is Iran. So I think it was in 2003, there was an enormous earthquake in Iran, and the U.S. said, you can Google this is online. The whole story is the U.S. came to Iran quietly, because Iran and the U.S. don't have really diplomatic relations. Came to Iran quietly and said, hey, we see that you've lost hundreds of thousands of people, so please accept our help so we can save lives. And Iran, did you make me a drink?
No.
Oh, it's you did? No, it's all good. I'm good.
But I'm here to babysit you. Check your Q&A, babe.
What? What's a Q&A?
I'll show you. Go ahead. Keep talking.
I don't know what that is.
I know.
Anyways, so where was I? Oh, so Iran said no. They turned us down. They don't want U.S. help, and understandably so. We don't get along. Well, once that death rate started reaching like 500,000 people, the U.S. came back and said, are you sure you don't need help? They turned us down again, but a few days later, Iran came and quietly said, yes, United States, please provide us help under one condition. It can't be the United States that's helping us. And they're like, what do you mean? And you're distracting.
Sorry.
What are you doing? Can I finish my story and then you do this?
Yeah.
Anyway, so
I'll just read them out loud too.
yeah, if you could just read them. That's why I have a moderator.
I'm gonna make you a drink. I'll be back.
What am I paying you for?
You love me.
Anyway, so Iran quietly came to the U.S. and said, yes, we need help. This is overwhelming our own systems, but please don't have it be the U.S. So what the U.S. did is they sent the USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and they came forward and said, you need to tape over everything that says U.S. on it, anything that's U.S. related, to include the C-130s that were flying into Iran. They taped over all of the U.S. markings so it didn't look like U.S. aircraft coming in, because C-130s operate all over the world. A lot of countries have them. And so it didn't look like U.S. The soldiers and airmen that came in to help didn't wear uniforms. And they didn't, so the U.S. came in and helped Iran. Now, did that buy us some goodwill? Absolutely. We're not absolutely benevolent. We're going to say, hey, we're helping you. We'll come back to the table and say, hey, remember when we helped you? It'd be real cool if you kind of slowed down this nuclear program you're trying to ramp up. But that wasn't going to be the only condition. We would have still helped. So I don't know how I got on that, but the U.S., oh, that's right. We will help our European allies because it's the right thing to do. Anyways. What president was that Iran aid under? It was under Bush, W. Bush Jr. So 2003. I guess I have questions. I don't know what the hell. Oh, Q&A. Holy shit, I got 31 questions. Okay. All right. Anyways. Sorry, I'm going through these now. Could China withstand a blockade and sanctions? I talked about that one sort of. A blockade, no. They would run out of oil very quickly. Russia cannot supply enough oil to China to keep its war machine running, so it would run out. Let's see here. How much money do you see the U.S. sending to Ukraine? That's a good question. Honestly, I don't know. I think we could see at least, and it's going to take a while. We're going to see what happens over the next couple of weeks. I've said to people that I think Russia, unless it does a regional or general mobilization, will culminate in its ability to fight in Ukraine by the end of the summer. I think this $40 billion will carry Ukraine for maybe a month, maybe not, but it's all very much fluid. I think the U.S. would be willing to give some more money as long as it might be just in a more dedicated sense, because this money was just broadly sent. I did a video that talked about how what that money went to. But I think that in a more broad sense, it would be much more pointed packages. Like, here's $200 million for radar systems. Here's $5 million for ammo, et cetera. So I think we will continue to see more money. I don't know how much that is. I said that if we let this war go, it'd cost us trillions. So right now it's cheaper for us to just go ahead and keep funding them in the billions of dollars.
Did you find it, or do you want me to?
I did. I found it. So, let's see. Would Western navies escort grain ships? No, that was they wouldn't. I talked about that earlier. It would have to be like Egypt or potentially Japan if they wanted to sail that far. A non-NATO country, but even then, Japan is kind of belligerent with Russia right now because of the Kuril Islands. So, is it true the Royal Navy is looking to escort grain? They were looking to do that originally, but I don't think that makes a lot of sense because it opens up the Royal Navy for an engagement with Russia, which then it becomes a war. And Russia is using this as a strategic situation where they're holding the grain on purpose. They're not going to just say, "Oh, a navy's here, let the grain go." They see what it is. They're using global hunger as a tool to try and lessen the sanctions against them. So Poland is getting outspoken. Do you think they're boots on the ground? No, I don't think they would be boots on the ground unless it was a NATO effort or they got attacked themselves. Poland is quite powerful. They're quite strong. They're actually, I would say, stronger than Ukraine, frankly. But they're also within the NATO framework, and they don't want to upset that as well. So should NATO go in the Black Sea? I already kind of talked about that. Do I believe in aliens? I don't know. That's a tough one. I believe in a weird either or, and it's to the far ends. Either we are not alone and aliens are just so advanced that we don't see them, or we are the most advanced in the universe, so no one's ever just had the tech to come see us. And I know I've seen a lot of those UFO videos. I haven't really researched them that are coming out of the Navy, but I think that either they're so advanced that if they were as advanced to have interstellar travel, they could come visit us and we won't even know that they're here, like some kind of crazy alien stealth. But then if we, and this is getting way off track, but then there's also the idea that we may be the most advanced in the universe because theoretically Earth is one of the more older planets when it comes to total universe. And this is out of my element just from my own watching of documentaries. And then the other one is we may be the only ones in the known universe. And that's kind of a scary thought that we may be alone as the advanced power, or not power, but advanced nation. So let's see here. What else we got? What's the deal with Lend-Lease for Ukraine? So the Lend-Lease program allows for the U.S. So there's two portions of it. And the Lend-Lease stems from back in the day, ironically, with Russia. We lent equipment to Russia, the United Kingdom, many of the European, what we call the Allied powers against the Axis powers. And as long as they returned that equipment or there was some agreement that they could keep it later on, that stayed with them and they were able to use it. And then the leasing of the equipment was, they got very favorable deals for leasing it. It was largely just, there was no, like you could lease it for like $1 a month or something like that. And it was just to kind of circumvent, and it wouldn't be circumvent, but it's more to kind of get around some of the rules when it comes to sending military equipment. And we've done the same thing for Ukraine so that we can send them more advanced equipment. And Ukraine, it gives Ukraine a catalog of what they need rather than us telling them what they should have. And they can say, well, we need you to lend us M777 howitzers. We need you to, we want to lease for the next 2 years these specific anti-missile systems like Patriot missiles. So that's kind of what it would be. It just frees up. It's more of a thing for the U.S. to free up its ability within law to give equipment. So let's see here. All right, I'm going to go back because I can't see myself. So
reminder about any gifts.
Oh, yeah. So I'll give you a reminder. Any of the gifts you guys give, go to Action Against Hunger. And I'm going to donate it all tomorrow. We have raised $54.96. I do take about 10% to do promotions. So I promoted this live. I paid about $10 to promote this live so people could see it. And then after that, everything else that I have goes into the charity. I absolutely do not take it myself. We don't need the money, thankfully, but we believe other people do. So I do this for fun. Isn't that weird? Like I like talking about these types of things and answering your questions. What's that?
Not if someone knows you. It's not weird.
Oh, not if someone knows me. Yeah. So anyways, so does anyone have any other questions? Because I'm kind of winding down. I've been on for a little over an hour, but if anyone has any other questions on China, the bottom line is going forward, I think the U.S. is in a position to dominate because its demographics are stronger. Its geography is unmatched. I mean, and because our resources, our ability to move those resources, our allies are strong. We have way stronger allies. We have very friendly neighbors. Thanks, Canada. I think we have, although to be fair to Ryan Reynolds, I've seen him lately, and I discussed this with my wife. I think Blake Lively is actually aging better than him, but don't tell him that because I'd feel bad. But it says, where would you want more bases near China? Philippines? The Philippines. I really think that, and the Philippines is close to agreeing to something like that. We have bases in Japan, obviously, and Korea, but the Philippines would be a humongous asset. I don't think I would want bases in Taiwan because that's just too much of a middle finger to China, but I think the Philippines would be a big help there. So will there be a PM update? Probably not. It's because of this. After this, I'm going to hang out with my wife and my kids and stuff. So, yeah. Macron, Kissinger. Yeah, I disagree. Which is weird. I was a huge fan of Kissinger. I've read 2 of his books. I thought he was a foreign policy genius, but I was absolutely surprised at his want to cede ground to Russia, and I don't know why that is. That doesn't bode well in the global order whatsoever, because it just emboldens countries to take what they want when they have nuclear weapons. And I disagree with Kissinger in that regard. So do you think we're in a more fragile situation than any time in our history? No, not at all. And I talked about this in a video before. The Cuban Missile Crisis, we came absolutely very close to global nuclear war, and it was astonishingly close. So, and I talk about this in a video, but kind of a quick run through. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, Russia was moving nuclear missiles into Cuba to counter the U.S.'s nuclear ambitions and missile systems moving into Turkey. So we were both moving nuclear missiles into our border. Kennedy, who was president at the time, said, basically created not a blockade, because a blockade is an act of war, created a quarantine. So he quarantined the ships that were trying to get to Cuba to put these nuclear missiles on there. The thing that Kennedy didn't know is there was already nuclear weapons there. He didn't know that that wasn't declassified until later on, until in the 90s after the Soviet Union collapsed. There was nuclear weapons already on missiles in Cuba aimed at the United States. And Kennedy didn't know that. And why that is dangerous is because Kennedy said, if this quarantine doesn't work, we're attacking Cuba. And the generals on ground, the Russian generals on ground in Cuba, had orders that if attacked, immediately fire nuclear weapons. So Kennedy said in an interview, but in a meeting with his staff, I think there's about a 1 in 3 chance that nuclear war starts. Looking back at what the actual reality was, there was probably about a 1 in 2. It was about a 50-50 shot. Because if Kennedy had invaded, nuclear weapons would have been shot and history would be vastly different. I think that was by far the most dangerous time the U.S. has ever been in, and it's not even remotely close to that right now. I would probably put our chances at nuclear war at something like 1 in 10,000 maybe. How crazy that era was, and how we got through that diplomatically with the various changes in regimes in the Kremlin and Kennedy, and after the assassination, it's just, I feel like it was just outstanding strokes of luck and potentially like some sort of divine intervention if you believe in those types of things. So I don't think we're close to nuclear war, and I definitely don't think we're as close as we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So let's see, would you warn us if we thought, yeah, absolutely. If I thought nuclear war was getting close, I'd tell everyone. I would probably not be the first to tell everyone. I'm not the smartest guy in this regard. If that was coming, I'd tell everyone. So,
the cards say no.
Oh yeah, the tarot cards say no. My wife does tarot. If you watched us on our live on my wife's account. And people actually wanted to see you more, so I might do a live on my account with you. Just know if we do a live on my account with my wife, it wouldn't be like geopolitics. It'd just be kind of us hanging out with you guys. So, yeah, based in Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka might be primed to take one right now with their economic problems. So,
we'll announce another live.
Yeah, we're definitely going to do more lives. And actually, I'm probably going to close this one out. I've been on for a little over an hour. Why is U.S. heavy equipment still not in Ukraine? All of our 777s are on the front line, but we're not willing to send like tanks and stuff, probably because of the escalation implications. So, Finland, Sweden joining? No, I think they're a force multiplier. I think that they provide good things for NATO, and I think that they're more of a help to NATO than a hindrance. And they aren't joining because they're afraid of Russia. They're joining because there's no reason not to join at this point. Their understanding with Russia was neutrality, and Russia has shown that it's no longer a neutral party. So, what should the U.S. do to encourage Israel-Palestine peace? Interestingly, during the Trump administration, he was doing a pretty good job of having all of the stakeholders from Middle Eastern nations meeting with Israel, and a lot of deals were made. And a part of those deals involved better treatment of Palestine. Well, since then, the U.S. Kind of involvement in the Middle East has degraded, not because of Biden or anything. It's just because we can only focus on so many things, China, Russia, and because of our lack of push in the Middle East, we've kind of pulled back. And because of that, there's been somewhat of a breakdown in what would be the Arab nations and Israel. And when those countries were coming together and giving the handshakes and stuff, it was good because it meant Israel was wanting to not do such terrible things in Palestine, and Palestine was being told to stop attacking Israel while we make these deals. But as the U.S.'s influence has waned, it's getting worse there, unfortunately. So, all right, guys. Sorry I can't get to all your questions. This has been great, but I do have 4 kids and a wife that I want to spend some time with, and I appreciate everything. I'll tally up all of the funds that you guys have sent, and I'll update my board. Tomorrow is when I'll pay that, and I'll tell you exactly how much I paid to the charity. It's a really good cause, and I really appreciate everything you've given. This isn't the last live I'm doing. I want to try and do maybe 2 a week. I'm not sure, but I also want to be prepared for them. I don't want to just come on here and be like, hey, ask questions. I want to actually kind of drive the conversation. So I do enjoy these, but I want to make it meaningful for you guys. And honestly, if I provide good content or I provide stuff that's educational, you're more willing to spend money on our cause. So I really appreciate everyone. Thanks for watching. I'll try to put this on my YouTube channel. I uploaded it. It takes a bit, but you should see it in the next day or two. You're all watching it, but if you missed part of it or anything, it was about an hour and 15 minutes long. So you can watch it there.
They want to know. We'll post the time of the next live.
Yeah, I'll post the time on the board for sure of the next live, and have kind of a topic. And it's kind of fluid because things are changing globally. But yeah, thanks everyone, and have a really good evening.